Welcome on behalf of Charter and Stack Me to our discussion series about building a better internet. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Charter. Stack is the best place for writers to earn money from their fans. You can get a free site and start publishing just by going to stck.me. And something relevant to our discussion that we're about to get into today, as of this week, you can now also sign up for one-click NFTs for writers. No technology learning curve involved. You can check it out. And then Charter is a media and insights business focused on building workplaces for the future. You can sign up for our free newsletter at charterworks.com. And please, we hope that you will do that. So the topic of our discussion today is how to build a better internet. This is the third conversation in a series. And our discussion today is with someone who holds positions of prominence for both the current web and for the next generation technology known as Web 3. Keith Grossman is president of Time, the 99-year-old media brand with a significant web and online video presence, among other things. He's also led the creation of a new business at Time called Timepieces that centers around the sale and usage of NFTs or non-fungible tokens. Timepieces, over a 12-month period spanning last March through this March, generated $15 million in revenue and $10 million in profit for Time, as well as $600,000 for charities. And Time has created now more than 20,000 timepieces, NFTs. Keith, thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Samir for hosting me with Stack, and to you and Charter. You know, I'm just a huge fan of what you're building out there.
Thank you, Keith. And for transparency, I'll mention that Charter has a partnership with Time to publish future work content on your site. This conversation is totally unrelated to that. They have a question about the future of work that I want to ask before we end. I just want to encourage everyone, if you folks who are watching, if you have questions, there is a chat, and we'll weave them in through the course of the discussion. So the goal today, as part of our Building a Better Internet series, is to talk about the role that Web3 could play for media brands and creators, and the shifting of control on the internet that it makes possible. Keith, I'd love just for some context, could you start by explaining more about what Timepieces is and why you launched it?
Sure. So is it okay? Can I step back just for everyone's clarity and sort of explain Web3 and what it is and what I saw that brought us to this? So Time did not plan to enter into this space. Hopefully over the course of the hour, you'll see the reason it entered into this space is more because I'm just a dorky technology fan who likes crypto, likes art, likes business, and saw all of these things coming together with a technological revolution that is being called Web3. When I say Web3, what I mean is four things. I mean crypto, DeFi, NFTs, and the metaverse. And they're all sort of grouped together, but they're all four very different things. And then sometimes they're interrelated. What I saw that sparked my interest in Web3, and it wasn't just like, it wasn't clear at first, was I want to take you back to like 2020, right? It was March, April 2020, and the world just stopped, right? And I was stuck upstate New York, and I was isolated, and I was lonely. And Kevin, I mean, like, I assume you were in this similar position, right?
Yeah.
And I was at my mother-in-law's with my wife and daughter and dog. It was like the equivalent of a zoo, walking around Clifton Park, New York. And I started to realize that my digital identity was just as important as my physical identity. And as a matter of fact, it's more scalable, because like in real life, I have about 3 friends, right? But on Twitter, I seemingly have 50,000 plus, right? And it's very interesting. And one is not more valuable than the other. They both sort of coexist together. And then I came across the technology that is referred to as an NFT, which really is not art or content. It's just a token that can verify ownership on a blockchain. And on top of that token, you could do a ton of different things. You could put content, you could put art and collectibles, you could create ticketing systems, you could verify healthcare. You can do unbelievable amount of things on top of this token. But what I started to think about was, wow, if I value owning things in real life, I'm also going to want to value owning things in my digital world too, right? And that was like the second sort of moment that came to me. And then the third was actually around the idea of community and collectibles. And what I started to see was some of these communities would emerge, and then people who had bought the same thing started to come together in communities on Discord and on Twitter. And those communities were based on shared psychographics as opposed to shared demographics or geographics, right? And all of this was swirling around my head throughout 2020. I couldn't really put my finger on it. And then in February of 2021, there was a sale, and the sale was Nyan Cat. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a very popular internet meme. And it sold for, I think it was like $560,000. And our owner, Mark Benioff, said to me, did you see this? He just said a very simple thing. Did you see this? And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, we could do this. And nobody understood. I said, just, does everyone understand why a cat with the body of a Pop-Tart, essentially farting a rainbow, excuse my language, just sold for $500,000? And everyone looked at me with blank faces. I said, please let me run with this, right? Trust me on this one. And what I saw at that moment was that the cover of Time, whether people wanted to believe it or not, in that red border, that iconic red border, has been an analog meme for about 99 years, right? And think about that, right? You go back to any cover at any point, right? Here, I'll take one right now and show you, right, that I have within arm's reach. 1980, right? But I guarantee that I just brought you back to December 22nd, 1980, Kevin.
Yeah.
And you remember everything you were doing at the moment you saw this cover, when this happened, right? And the power of Time, what I saw was the power of Time, even though it's known as a written brand, is actually in this meme visually, right, on the cover. And the cover happens to have a connection with society. And as I started to think about that, and it was with no dismissing of the written word's actually amazing and super important, I started to realize that Time could play in a very visual space. And I started with one of ones, and we made this announcement in March, of 2021, that we were going to sell one of ones. And we did 4 covers, and they did very well. And then we did a few more. And then I said within 30 days, we would accept cryptocurrencies for digital subscriptions. And it only took 28 days. And we now take 33 digital currencies for subscriptions at a time. And then I said within 6 months, we will figure out how to use this technology, a token and a blockchain, to come up with a new form of community with Time. And at that moment in time, Kevin, I had no clue how I was going to do it. Literally no clue. I just knew the technology could do it and that it was happening. And for 6 months, I sat in clubhouse rooms and listened and took notes and saw a tremendous evolution taking place, not just with the technology, not just with the communities, but with the relationship that creators can have with their content, and the relationship that the individual communities can have with each other and with brands. And I saw equation shift as it relates to how communities evolve from top down to bottom up. And I saw sort of the trust that individuals were having that was challenged move from a top down to a bottom up sort of structure. And I saw in it a new form of economic success that creatives could have with the advent of a smart contract. And all of that sort of led to the thinking behind the launch of Timepieces. And so that is a very long-winded answer to what is Timepieces. Timepieces is Time's Web3 community. We partner with artists, and it exists currently on Discord and on Twitter, and directs back into the site. And it's about 50,000 people, and it's a values-based community.
How would you describe, when you say it's a values-based community, how would you describe the values?
Sure. So, there's a lot to be said about, the NFT space today. And I think that the NFT space prior to maybe this crypto winter had really strongly divided itself into 2 distinct communities. And they both were very good for the space's evolution in the beginning, even though there was mania, which we could talk about. But, one is a greed-based community and the other is a values-based community. And when I say values-based community, what I mean is like we literally do not discuss what I would say is floor price of the NFTs ever. We don't discuss trading. We don't discuss value as it relates to monetary return. What we do discuss and rally the community around is inclusivity, optimism, the freedom to provide constructive feedback that we will take and evolve with, and what we call a hashtag give first mentality, right? And um, what I mean by that is like we nonstop from our moderators reinforce those values. We reinforce them every week in our weekly time hall. We reward our community members who exemplify those values, and we ban people who do not have those values, right? So, as much as there's a wonderful sort of democratic openness of Web3, right? Like our community is an inclusive, optimistic community. We're inclusive as long as you are not um, uh, exclusive in your demeanor to the community at whole. So while Discord has grown tremendously, we've banned a tremendous amount of people as well who have not adhered to our values.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like your community values are in contrast to a lot of what people think of as the crypto trading
So
community.
so that's a greed-based community, right? And just like the news, right? People like to see the extremes, right? They like to see extreme successes and extreme fails. Like what people don't like is wake up every morning and things are just good and move forward, right? And
Mhm.
so, in greed-based communities, what you have is a group of people that have one interest at heart, which is their own selfish sort of desire to make more money. And what that means is that as liquidity dries up, right, which it did recently, and I've said this publicly since April of this year, so I'm on record on this, is those individuals will use the community as its like exit liquidity, right? And there's every element of like in a new technology where um, money is involved. Like you're going to have people who have good intent with how it can be used and harnessed in the right direction, and you have people who will use it for selfish intent. But it's not the NFT that is ultimately making those decisions. All the NFTs is a token that connects to a blockchain and shows online ownership. It's the individuals. And so I think for writers and for creators, what's really important is how you associate yourself within the space and who you associate yourself within the space and how you present yourself within the space, right? Like we believe that values create value over time. Like, so we're not in this to say that we're not looking for everyone to, win with timepieces or for time to win with timepieces. Like we want everyone to, but we are not going to play short-term gimmicks or stunts to do so.
I want to ask you in a minute about how you think about individual creators can think about NFTs and Web3, but first unpack a few of the things that you said. One of them is you talked about how your original idea was that the Time cover was a meme basically, and that this was really ripe for creation as an NFT. Um, the actual content of timepieces NFTs has changed a
Mm-hmm.
lot since that original observation, and you have dropped I think over 20,000 NFTs, and as far as I can tell, most of them at this point are collaborations
Yes.
with individual artists and up and coming artists, and so you've evolved from the cover as meme to being a kind of reputational vouching for creators and supporting them. Is that a fair?
That's a 100% accurate depiction, right? There's two ways that we can look at our strategy in the space, right? As it relates to NFTs in particular today. One is, our one of one strategy, and one is our community based strategy. Our one of one strategy celebrates the past, right? So that's the covers and the history, the 99 years of legacy that Time has. Um, the community, though, celebrates the future, right? And says these are the creators that we believe are emerging from communities. And we want to take our brand and uplift them further. And here's the equation that I sort of wrapped my head around in July of 2021 as I was studying the space, which was in Web 2. So I'll make a few definitions and clarifications so that way nobody hears me in weird rhetorics, right? But Web 1 is a read-write web in my definition. Web 2 is a read-write-share web, and Web 3 is a read-write-share ownership web, right? And we can talk about privacy in a minute because there's huge implications as you move from Web 2 to Web 3, and you move from being an online renter to an online owner as it relates to privacy and value. But what I noticed in Web 2 was that the formula for success in Web 2 was brand hires a creator who attracts an audience. So like, I'm going to break that down for a second. Like, I mean, like I'll use Time as a great example. So Time hires Ian Bremmer, who writes a great piece on foreign policy, and then people search for it or come to time.com. They see it's Ian Bremmer, they see it's Time, and they read it, and then they go. Okay, that's the exact formula essentially for content success in Web 2. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah.
Right. So in Web 3, what you find in the community-based aspects of Web 3, where we're playing today, is the formula for success is actually community uplifts a creator, and then the brand comes in and uplifts the creator further, uses its platform to actually elevate it further, validating the creator that's been validated by the community. And by validating that creator, you're validating the community. The community comes around and says, I like this brand for validating my belief system or my creator, right? And so it's completely inverted, except for the creator who remains in the middle, right? And the problem for some creators that they should see is that it's not an either or. You can actually go and play both games today. You don't have to choose Web 3 or Web 2, right? And we play, I think, a Web 2.5 game, and we can talk about that as well. But the creator, for their entire career, have been looking this way. And now for the first time ever, they can look this way and they can look this way, right? And so what we did when we moved into the community-based initiative with timepieces is we really looked for signals from the community as to who are the creators that they support and believe in. And these are amazing creators that, by the way, are selling at Christie's and Sotheby's today, or at Bonhams today, or Phillips today for a tremendous amount of money. But these are amazing creators that we say, you know, these are people who we want to associate with our brand. And these are people like Kath Simard, like Drift, like Fuck Render, like Victor Mascara, Beige. And what started with 38 creators in September of last year turned into 89 creators as of today.
And they're all visual artists, right, Keith?
They're all visual artists, with the exception of Timberland, who is a music producer, right? And we did a drop with him, a musical drop with him, and also we did a drop with Andrew Wang, who's a writer, as we were experimenting with, you know, like, what is the potential for the written word, right? This is a very easy space to be able to understand how to monetize and how to build off of imagery and videos and audio. But the written word is the thing that I think about quite a bit.
Why don't we go there? Because I think that's a question a lot of us have, and probably a lot of the Stack community has. Seeing the success of visual artists, what is the potential of NFTs for text, for writers, for creators who work primarily with text?
I wish, Kevin, that I had like a definitive answer, and like I could tell you sort of where my brain is going with it, and I have not solved it today, and I think about this quite a bit. And my email to anyone who's chimed in is keith@time.com. If you have ideas, like, I welcome all of them, because I think that this is something that I really, really, really want to solve. There are a few ways that I can see it. One is the written word itself does not necessarily have to be the NFT, right? So like the way that you know, you have some of these platforms where they give the tools of access to the writers. You know, what you could do is you could publish a password protected blog on your own site, issue an NFT, and if the consumer has the NFT, it unlocks and provides access to the written word on the site, right? So it's a membership approach that you can do. The second is you could do that with Telegram, right, or WhatsApp, and just use something like Collabland. And instead of even having to worry about, like building a website, you could literally do it within a text messaging app and make it more personal, right? So you could publish your thoughts or your journals or links to things and have chats in those groups. And I think that if you look at something like the Club CPG, which I'm a member of, like they do a really nice job of, creating gated community. The third is if you look at the poetry NFTs, they're beginning to have some success. But I haven't seen written words in the long form have a tremendous amount of success. We published the first ever decentralized magazine on the blockchain, which was an interactive issue of Time that Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, was on. But that's more of a collectible in my mind than it is a new medium, right? But the challenge I would give people, and this is why I'm not so set that like we have the answer just yet, is with all new technologies and evolutions, the solution tends to always be in the beginning, how does the consumer behave today, and how can I apply that similar behavior to this new technology? And I just don't buy that that's how people are going to continue to consume content. And just in full disclosure, I am a huge, gigantic believer in the written word, and a huge, firm believer in long form journalism too, right? And so I think that there is a place for it. I think that evergreen content will probably have more success in the short term than commoditized content, which would have to move towards a membership model. But it is an area that I would not dismiss if I was a writer, because the way in which you can capture revenue for your work evolves in Web3 in a really meaningful manner. And I would not dismiss it based on any confusion you might see in the marketplace today.
Keith, you would think that like one of the analogs for written word for collectibles is the first edition. So the first edition of a book, for example, is something that has like great value, and you could imagine an NFT equivalent with a limited edition of a specific work. Are people trying that, and what do you think of that as an avenue for?
I mean, I think it does work, right? So we did yesterday, or the day before, I apologize. 24-hour sale of a cover of Time that Aku did, that was called Enter the Metaverse, which is the same thing as a first edition, right? It marks a moment in time where something is great and like you want to have it. What's really important, and I think I would just caution is if you play the game of how do the next 100 million consumers enter into the space, right? Like I could tell you definitively the next 100 million consumers are coming in mass, right? And what's going to happen is a lot of friction is going to exit the space as players like MasterCard and Visa and MoonPay and PayPal all continue to make it easier on the front end. And people over the next 2, 3, 4 years will stop saying even the word NFT, the same way that you and I no longer say what our chips are in our computers, right? You don't say, I have a Pentium, I have a 486, I have a 14.4 BPS modem. You did at one point, right? But you did that at the point when technology led the conversation. What we're beginning to see is that there's a path where the technology becomes invisible and the consumer just talks about the experience, right? And the reason I say that is that what I would caution people about is, yes, first editions are great in the collectible space, right? But the space is bigger than collectibles, and the next 100 million people are not going to come in through collectibles. They're going to come in through sort of the token verifying ownership for things like tickets or memberships or unlocking access to things, right? And that doesn't mean that the collectible community is going to go away either, right? It will still emerge. But if I was a writer today, I would think about how to utilize the membership aspect and the ability to humanize yourself to a group of people. One of the most powerful things I've seen in this space in the past year is that the barriers between collectors and creators are essentially removed. And all of a sudden, people have like a real relationship with individuals, right? And I mean, Kevin, like I've loved your work personally, like when you were at Quartz for years. And, in full disclosure, the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Charter is someone who's very close to me and worked with Kevin. And so I was a fan. There's a huge difference between reading your work and knowing you as a human being, right? Um, and I think that what Web3 does provide a lot of people, if you take advantage of it, is as a creator, getting to know your community or humanizing yourself more, which then makes your work more valuable, in my opinion, to the community.
It's really interesting. So basically what you're saying for individual creators at this point, there is the creators who are text-based. Let's stay on that for a minute. There's an opportunity that's collectible. So it's the equivalent of a first edition like you've done with this latest issue of Time and the metaverse issue and the other blockchain one. But there's also an opportunity to issue tokens, which are effectively membership in a community that allows people to access your writing. There have been some experiments, haven't there, with communities that are basically collections of writers, and there's one of them, I'm blanking on the name. Was it Crystal or one of the
I know that there have been, right?
Yeah.
And I know that there, I think Ben Mesrick, who has done a really nice job of as a writer, still creating the analog experience, creating the Web 2 experience, and also entering into the Web 3 experience. And he does it with his books, right? And creates limited editions and whatnot. But I do think in that vein, right? Like if you think about what's the value of the written word, for me personally, it's taking the text and sort of absorbing it into your brain, right? And like I said to my daughter yesterday, and this is a total tangent. I have an 8-year-old daughter. Her name's Ellie, and I said to her yesterday, as she was cleaning out to donate some of the books in her room, I said, "Have you read every book in this room?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Isn't it cool that every book in this room is now in your brain?" And her head like exploded. And I pointed out, like, your brain is a muscle and how the importance of reading. Like my fear with just looking at the written word from the collectible perspective is you're turning something of tremendous mental value into something that is solely a dollar value, right? And then I think that's, if it goes back to the original thesis of breaking down into values-based communities and greed-based communities, you essentially are reinforcing the greed element at the expense of maybe pushing more of the values element. And I think that there has to be a nice balance between the two.
Could you imagine Time elevating individual written creators in the community in the way that you have with visual creators? It sounds like that might be part of your vision for a next chapter.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge we have really is one of when you move into the written word, right? In the image sphere, you can look very simply at sort of the aesthetics of the work, the individual, the creator, what their belief system is, do their values align with you, right? When you move into the written word, the thing that will very much be important as we explore this area, and it's definitely something that we talk about internally quite a bit, is the values have to align with the values of Time. So you have to be, trustworthy. It has to be, objective. It has to be within sort of the parameters of what we believe is acceptable for the Time brand. But yeah, I mean, like I don't foresee a scenario where if we can make sure that quality is not compromised, as we've done with, the imagery world, and the music world and the audio world and the video world, then we would 100% enter into it. And I think that there's a real opportunity to show, writers that you can have a viable path forward. And I allude to this a few times, but if it's okay, I'd love to sort of just explain what I mean by this.
Yeah.
With an NFT, you have what's called a smart contract, and it's very confusing to a lot of people, because they think contract, and the term is just totally wrong. What it really is it's just a line of code, and what that code says is, as this gets bought and sold, right, X% can be allocated to the original creator, right? And so let me give you like a real example. When you buy a timepiece, that's what's called the primary sale, when we mint it, right? Which means putting it on the market. And 100% of that sale goes to time. We then donate on timepieces 1% to charity. And then we split the remaining 99% of the primary sale evenly with the creator, right? So we only take, 40, my brain is off a little bit.
44.5%.
Right? We take half and they take half. So sorry about that. I'm having a senior moment, Kevin, right?
Yeah.
And, but then there's what's called a secondary sale, right? And we allocate a 10% royalty on the secondary sale.
Yeah.
And every time that asset is sold over and over and over again, or that token is sold over and over and over again, Time receives 10% of whatever that goes for, right? And so if it sells for $10, we get $1. And then of that dollar, we take 1% and we donate it to charity. And then we take the remaining 99% and we split it evenly with the creator in perpetuity, right? So all 89 creators within the Timepiece family, and I use the term family deliberately because they actually receive an ETH transfer, an Ethereum transfer from us every 3 months on the performance of their secondary sales, right? And so what that means is that in Web3, a creator moves from monetizing their moment of creation, right, your aha moment, to being able to monetize your impact on society, essentially. And that's really important because then all of a sudden creators can have a meaningful life in the arts, and that narrative of the starving creator, right, can actually disappear over time with success in this space, because you can have a fair distribution of how money sort of circulates through the ecosystem back to the original creator.
And that's in contrast to one of the models in visual arts where someone sells a painting, for example, and they get some percentage of the initial sale price, but then the sort of tick up in price subsequently isn't returned to them in any way.
Right. In the traditional method, the risk actually goes to the first collector.
Yeah.
And the reward goes to the first collector. It doesn't go to the creator. In this, the creator can win in perpetuity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Keith, you've been talking about the community a bunch and like using the token to unlock the community. You mentioned the timepieces exist on Twitter and Discord, but there are also ways in which you're trying to support and activate the community that go beyond that. And so maybe you talk a little bit about what really practically it means to be a member of the timepieces community, and then kind of what your advice is for individual creators or others who are thinking about what are the essential ingredients of a community that people find worthy of their time and valuable to be involved in.
Sure. So, like we have time.com over here, which we'll call Web 2, and we have timepieces over here, which we'll call Web 3. And the trick, in my opinion, it's not really a trick, it's the wrong word, but like the approach that we're taking is, how can we learn in the Web 3 community and apply that into Web 2? And how can we take the 99 years of history and access that we have in Web 2 and bring it into Web 3, right? And the way that we do it is a few sort of approaches. First is, if you own a timepiece over here, you can connect your digital wallet to time.com without ever giving me your personal information. So I don't need to know it's Kevin Delaney, and I will remove the paywall for you. And so all of a sudden, having this token over here unleashes and unlocks everything over here, right? And so I think that's the most simplistic sense, and that was what I was saying is a way in which writers can create membership. And we have dropped 20,000 tokens. We've actually a little bit more now, but we have about 12,000 wallets, a little bit more now that since this week I have to update all the numbers that hold timepieces. And about half of those, 6,000 of those wallets, have connected to time.com to gain access to the content on the site. The second is the history of time gives a lot of access to a lot of great people. And like, how can we bring them into the community over here, right? So, we've had people from Amelia Clark to, Deepak Chopra to Madonna and Beeple, talking with the community at large, either in our Discord or, on Twitter Spaces. And I think that only comes by taking the history and the legacy and the the esteem of the Time brand, and then bringing that into Web3. And then the third is we look at, like what we learn over here from community, and we say, is there things that we could fix or tweak over here in Web2 because we see things are evolving? And then the final is we have events, right? And what we say to people is, wouldn't you like to attend the Time Person of the Year with Elon Musk? And we do contests. And we say to the community, if you're a timepiece holder, you can enter in to get one of 5 tickets to attend Time Person of the Year with Elon Musk. And we've seen that thousands of people within the community are willing to enter into those contests. And the only way we could do it is by taking the Web3 sort of world and then bringing it into our sort of Web2 and more analog sort of experiences. So we always make sure that we are using the strengths of all of them to play back and forth against each other.
What's striking listening to you talk about this are basically 2 shifts from Web to Web3, and one of them is going from a group of customers to a community of enthusiasts around a shared image, and the other one is around the change in the structural economics of web, which is in terms of content consumption has been big kind of gatekeepers, whether it's Facebook or search engines like Google or big media brands that effectively they're monetizing the attention of the users, and they're in an arbitrage situation with the content creators who can attract that attention. And so it's a lot to lump together, but like one thing I've been really interested to hear you talk about before is the power of enthusiasts. And you may not know exactly where this is going to go for Time in the next 99 years, but it's a pretty powerful thing to have a relationship with individuals around interest and enthusiasm, as opposed to someone, and to be really sort of admittedly dismissive of it, but someone who flips through a Time magazine, print magazine in their dentist's office. Like, it's a pretty different relationship.
You bring up an amazingly important point. You actually bring up like tons of points. I'm glad we have 21 minutes left. A lot to unpack.
Dive in, please.
The first is most people do not distinguish between audiences and communities. Okay. Yeah. And that is a huge differentiator. An audience shows up and leaves. Okay. That's it. Right. They show up for one moment and leave. And they can show up for the magazine in the dentist's office, as you say, and then they go home and their day continues on. And a community builds, community supports, a community has passions, a community is driven by something deeper than the moment at hand, right? And so like, here's like a real benefit of building community versus just having audiences. The Timepieces community actually grew double digits in terms of percentages during the last 4 months or 3 months as we've entered into what has been dubbed the crypto winter, right? And like, what does that say? Is that the community is seeing something bigger than the moment, right? And I never made this distinction in my entire career, Kevin, until I was at Wired and we took over Ars Technica. And like, I loved my time at Wired. I loved my time at Ars, okay? Loved both of those brands tremendously. But with Wired, what I saw was Wired was an audience based brand, right? It put out ideas and it changed and had impact on the general public, and people would talk about it and then they would go,
Yeah.
right? They would say things like long tail or crowdsourcing and have no clue that Wired ever even invented those words, right? Or terms. Ars Technica, on the other hand, had community members that spent 13 minutes in the comments section alone, helping each other through problems, right? And those people came back every day and held their hands. And I think about that all the time, right? Like the difference between an audience and a community. Like think about 13-minute average in comments helping people out, right? That was the first time in my life that I ever made that distinction. And now I'm going to like sort of show you a real example. There's this guy and his name's Matthew Cherry, and he's a member of the timepiece community. And I remember when he entered in the first time and he said, I want to be a professional photographer. I have 0 followers on Twitter. He had 0 followers on Twitter when he entered in. I have never sold a photograph in my life, but I'm going to learn how to become one. Okay. Today, he's sold numerous pieces to numerous collectors. He has 5,000 followers. And what he did was he went into the timepieces community and then he went into the photo community within the timepieces community. So it's not one. He went into a specific passion and he started to just talk to all the photographers and started to ask them what works, what doesn't work, how do you position yourself, how do you sell, how do you do this, how do you do that, what type of camera do you use, like how do you take these type of angles, how do you adjust light a certain way, how do I price myself, how do I market myself? And the community helped him through it. And now he's successful in his own right as a photographer with 5,000 followers. And that might seem small compared to Time's 19 million followers, but this was literally 7 months ago. And then if you go on, and his Twitter handle, I believe, is Matthew the First. If you go on, he's always supporting Time and timepieces, right? And promoting it because he's seen how the community has helped him personally. And he wants to make sure that he's pushing that out to others. And like that's not something like you can't build a community at scale, right? You could build what I would say is a ecosystem that supports values at scale, but like where the communities really occur is you bring people into the ecosystem that stands for something, and then you have sub communities that align their passions. So some people love photography, and some people love line drawings, and some people love animation, right? And some people just want to talk about tech, right? And like you have to just identify where your communities are and how to tap into those. The other thing that you bring up is really important, which is the role of how the consumer has been valued today versus what the potential is for how the consumer is valued, not monetarily valued, but like valued meaning like cared for in a Web3 world. Today in Web2, you exist online as a renter. And what Web3 sort of moves towards is the ability for the individual to exist online as an owner. Okay. And it doesn't mean that it's a fully decentralized ecosystem. What it means is that Web3 strives towards decentralization. It doesn't strive towards trustlessness. It strives towards shifting trust from being top down, where you have to trust the actors at the top, to bottom up, where the technology can verify sort of that XYZ has happened. But the most important aspect, I think, is this shift in privacy that occurs when you move from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, right? So in Web 1, privacy is a nobody owns anything privacy. It was just a mess. You went online, nobody knew how to track, nobody knew what to look at. Web 2, where you exist as a renter, they, meaning all the platforms or the biggest players in the game, own you. Okay, don't kid yourself. If you're on Facebook, they know more about you and what you're doing than you know about you and what you're doing. And you know that they know, right?
Yeah.
But you exist on that platform so that way you can communicate to others. And the reason they don't charge you is because you are the product, right? When you move into Web3, when you own an NFT and you enter into a community, it provides you with the opportunity where you own you. Now, what that means is like, I don't know who these 50,000 people are in the timepiece community, right? I know who they are when they self-identify, and I know who they are through what their like wallet address is, right? But like knowing that your wallet FXCYX2QRB is meaningless at the end of the day. And so what it means is that the relationship that a company or a brand has to have with its consumer is it has to say to the consumer, if I want to know that it's Kevin Delaney, right? I have to give you something that you want in return for your personal information. Whereas right now, I don't have to give you anything in return for your personal information, right? Because I can get it like that. The reason that it's important to make this distinction is globally, we're seeing a lot of shifts take place. So you see the rise in GDPR in Europe, which is a privacy reform, the rise of CCPA in the United States, a privacy reform, and you see Google publicly announcing that they're going to be sunsetting third-party cookies, right? So if all of those things are happening, all of these brands that have been reliant on sort of extracting value from the consumer are going to have to find new ways of valuing the consumer. And that's huge. It's a huge shift, right? Now, it doesn't mean that there are not new patterns to look at, and there doesn't mean that there are not new ways of contextually targeting the consumer. But if I really want to know that it's you, I have to actually value you now in this ecosystem. And that's a gigantic shift that I think will take place. And I think that one of the biggest outcomes that will happen is not community per se, it's membership offerings, right, into and loyalty programs, right, that I think that brands will move towards. And I think that that's going to be your gigantic sort of moment of how did the next 100 million people enter into this ecosystem? Well, they enter in through the technology being invisible, but providing far more access more efficiently and more valuable to the consumer, and sort of the NFT making that connection behind the scenes.
And so the NFT is the token that gives me membership, and in return for what I get, I'm willing to give some visibility into who I am and what my interests are and so forth.
And like, you should not ever be using the term NFT in 5 years. If you are, then the technology is still leading.
Keith, we just have a few minutes, and they're two big topics, but maybe we could treat them quickly. The first is, as you were talking about this question of ownership, one of my personal interests is something that we've talked about before, and it's DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which people see as a potential new structure for organizing work. And they're super interesting, and in investment context, there are a bunch of DAOs that seem to be operating where people are basically democratically, more or less, making decisions about what their pooled money will invest in. But I'm not seeing quite yet the spillover into more generalized work arrangements, and was wondering kind of where your thinking is on how widespread these blockchain-based smart contracts around work effectively will be.
I mean, I think that what you're seeing right now is essentially the Gartner curve playing out to a T, right?
Yeah.
Like, as new technologies entering in, everyone goes euphoric over what its potential. It could like solve world peace, like everyone can win, like all this stuff, and then everyone like crashes down and becomes extraordinary. Like, well, it hasn't been adopted yet, and it hasn't there, and I think that with everything, the best article I ever read that shaped my opinion on everything was written by David Pogue back in the New York Times, I think in 2008. And he said, and he was going over to Yahoo, and it was his final article in the New York Times, and it was titled "What I Learned After Covering Tech for 10 Years." And he said, things don't die, they splinter, right? And he goes, video did not kill the radio star, instant coffee did not kill coffee. And he like goes on. It's really a fun article. He like sort of gave the lessons that he learned in that. And as it relates to DAOs, what I love about the DAOs is that people are thinking tremendously and creatively different about how can they create new structures and new forms of interacting and being successful together, given that the technological landscape has shifted and have enabled things, right? I love that. I mean, the one thing that we have to always just be careful about is regulation, right? And I think that what the space needs is responsible regulation, right? Because once you have regulation, you get clarity. And once you have clarity, then you start to see large corporations be able to enter in and move fast and big in terms of how they want to implement things. And, I love that the experimentation is taking place, right? But the reality is that um, Web3 will probably be adopted faster and at the mass level from existing corporations that adopt it rather than going from 0 to 1 and organizations that emerge from it. And there will be a lot of organizations that emerge from it that will be very, 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 very successful, and I think will be competitive with existing organizations. But when you have 100 million people on your platforms per se, if you all of a sudden open it up to a new sort of DAO-like experience or a Web3 experience, getting those people into the new ecosystem is going to be easier and quicker and more efficient than reforming from scratch. The question is going to be, though, regulation and clarity as to legally what's real, what isn't real, what's possible, what's not possible, and then how does it, from a financial perspective, impact sort of taxing and accounting, right? And I think that those are questions that have to be solved before you see mass adoption.
That makes sense, because there's so much regulation around corporations that to have a new structure that does the same things would run into that. Keith, to wrap it up, I want to ask you what your vision for the next chapter of timepieces and Web3 at time are. What are you looking ahead to?
So first, thank you so much just to have the conversation, and I hope it was interesting today, Kevin.
This is great.
I want to figure out how to do the written word, right? I will say that we've learned a lot over the past year and a half that we've been in this space. Like, we've had a lot of success, and like those successes are always the ones that are highlighted, but we made a lot of mistakes too. And I think it's important that people understand that, like, in this space, it's evolving very quickly, and it's okay to like jump in and make mistakes, right? Like, and we're probably going to continue to make mistakes, like, and that's fine too. We're just going to continue to tweak and refine from it. I mean, one of the most important things to me personally is taking the learnings that we've had as a large brand, that with a 100-year history, and showing other organizations and players how to responsibly be able to enter into the space, right? And to have the same success as us, right? Like, as weird as it sounds, sometimes like being a lonely island in the space is not the best sort of place to be. Like, you want an ecosystem around it. And I think it's very early, and we've been very fortunate with how the ecosystem has supported us and uplifted us. And I want others to be able to hear that and to see how we did it, and to be able to also do it themselves. So I think that helping other brands is one thing that you're going to see from us over the coming days, months, and weeks, and years. Like, another area is there's a lot of great IP in the space, and we've been clear that with Time Studios, what we want to do is we want to be able to help some of these static IP creators develop their communities into television shows, right? And so we have signed people like the Robotos up, and the Littles up, and Toy Boogers up, and people could laugh about them and smile and say whatever they want. They're cute names, but like, these are legitimate communities with tens of thousands of fans and owners in them. And we have actually gone into production for 2 television shows with 2 Web3 communities that we're essentially developing backwards, right? Like, and that's the Littles and the Robotos. And we've partnered with Nirvana out of Canada to develop those. And we're working on distribution deals. So like, you're going to start to see them on TV. And then the third is, as it relates to timepieces in the community itself, is, like, I just want to make sure that we continue to, I guess, just experiment and push the boundaries as to how we can think about creating meaningful experiences, and continuing to tie it into the larger Time brand. Like, there's a moment where I can see that timepieces and Times Web3 sort of community and Times mass community come together. But like, I don't see that in the coming year or so, right? Because I think that there's still too many frictions in play in the existing ecosystem. The final thing I guess I would say to anyone listening, if you feel like it's overwhelming, right? I would say there's this great expression of, the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And my invitation to anyone here would be, go into the Timepieces Discord, introduce yourself, like see what it's like, just to interact with people. Don't buy any NFT. Don't worry about it. When you're ready and you like it, like just play with it, right? Like buy a cheap NFT, $10 NFT, right? But just break that chasm of actually owning something digitally. And once you do that the first time, then like the place starts to come into sort of a new perception for you. And if you don't want to do that, no worries. I would say just keep an open mind and watch the space continue to get easier and easier and easier for you to enter into before you don't even realize that an NFT is somewhere behind the scenes just making the connections. But that's the ultimate sort of North Star for where this goes.
Keith, that was great. Thank you. I've emerged smarter, hopefully, from this hour spent with you, and it feels like a lot of really interesting things, including text, figuring that out, the convergence of Time's broader community with your Web3 communities, and as you're saying, the opportunity that's open to any creator to start playing with this and seeing what the potential is. So thanks for spending this time with us, and we will keep this conversation going. I want to thank everyone who's joining us on behalf of Stack and Charter, and also note, as I said, that Stack this week has launched the ability for any creator using its platform for free to create NFTs of their work. So another way for people to dip your toes in. And as I mentioned, Charter is a future of work organization, and you can find us at charterworks.com. So Keith, thank you again. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you everybody else for joining us.
Have a great one, Kevin.
Okay.